On the 8th of May 2026, the United States government launched a new website, black background, white typewriter font, very dramatic, very cinematic. The kind of design that signals you are about to witness something that will change everything you thought you knew. The website is called war.gov/UFO, and it contains the first official release of classified government files on UFOs, unidentified aerial phenomena, aliens, the whole thing. 161 documents, videos, photographs, FBI interviews, Apollo mission material spanning decades, released to the public with no security clearance required. The White House spokesperson said, "The American people asked, and President Trump delivered." Let me tell you what is actually in these files, because that is the question nobody seems to be asking loudly enough. An FBI interview with a drone pilot who saw a linear object with a bright light for 5 to 10 seconds, and then the light went out and the object vanished. A military report of multiple glares, or light, from an unknown origin observed in Syria in 2024, where Russia, Iran and various other nations operate advanced drone technology that the US military would have every reason not to publicly identify. Apollo mission photographs, where the astronauts themselves theorized the lights might be chunks of ice. An infrared still image of an unidentified object over the western United States. Law enforcement reports of orbs launching other orbs, which the Department of Defense described as among the most compelling material in the release. That is what is in the files. Drone pilots seeing lights that disappear. Apollo photographs that the people taking them thought were probably ice chunks. Military reports of unidentified objects in airspace over conflict zones. 161 documents of this on a black website with white typewriter font. Released with enormous fanfare as the most significant government UFO disclosure in American history. And the DoD put a disclaimer on their own website saying that the language in the military memos reflects the subjective interpretation of the person who wrote the report and should not be interpreted as conclusive evidence of what actually happened. The government's own UFO disclosure website tells you not to read the UFO disclosures as conclusive evidence of anything. So, the spectacle is the product, the content is almost irrelevant. Now let me tell you what was happening in America in the weeks before this release, because this is the part that matters. In January 2026, the Department of Justice released what it said was its final major batch of Epstein documents. 3 million pages, 180,000 images, 2,000 videos. The survivors immediately issued a statement, 18 women. They said, once again, survivors are having their names and identifying information exposed, while the men who abused us remain hidden and protected. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie and Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna, the two bipartisan authors of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, formally requested to review all the unredacted files to verify government compliance with the law. They were not satisfied. The files were heavily redacted. Key sections were missing. Co-conspirators whose names were sealed in the 2008 plea deal remained unsealed. Trump's own name appears in the documents. A photograph showing Trump appeared briefly on the government website and was removed. In February 2026, Trump ordered the UFO disclosure, and Thomas Massie, the Republican congressman who co-wrote the law demanding Epstein transparency, publicly called the UFO files the ultimate weapon of mass distraction. A sitting member of Congress, one of the people who wrote the actual law, said that, in those exact words, "You can decide for yourself what to make of the timing, but the timing is what it is, and the timing tells you everything you need to know about what this is and what it is not. This is not transparency. Governments do not release information because they suddenly decide to be honest. They release information when the cost of holding it exceeds the cost of releasing it, or when releasing one thing is less politically expensive than having people keep asking about something else. The Epstein files cost too much to hold in full, so they release them redacted. The names of the men who received trafficked children cost more than the redactions, so the names stay redacted. And the political cost of a sustained public focus on those redactions exceeded the cost of launching a dramatic website and releasing some infrared footage of lights that disappear after 10 seconds. So we get the lights. But here's the thing, this is not new, this is not unprecedented, this is a pattern that has been running continuously for decades with specific documented examples that most people have either forgotten or never knew about. And understanding the pattern is the only way to understand what is actually happening right now. Let's start with the Romans. Because Juvenal said it best in the 1st century, panem et circenses, bread and circuses. He was describing the specific strategy Roman emperors used to keep control of a population that might otherwise have noticed the corruption, the inequality, the gap between the promises of the Republic and the reality of the empire. Give them enough food to not starve and enough entertainment to not think about what is actually happening, and the population stays manageable. The games at the Colosseum, the chariot races, the public spectacles that people would talk about for weeks rather than talking about who controls the grain supply or why the legal system produces different outcomes for different people. The specific form of the circus changes across 2,000 years. The function does not, and the function of a dramatic government website, releasing footage of lights in the sky, is the same function as the Colosseum in the 1st century. It gives people something extraordinary to discuss, something that makes them feel they are living through a historic moment, something that takes the energy of public curiosity and redirects it upward, literally, toward the sky and away from the specific documents that specific powerful people would strongly prefer not to be the primary topic of conversation. Now let's talk about a more recent example, because the modern version of this has a name: Wag the Dog. The 1997 film where a political fixer and a Hollywood producer manufacture a fictional war to distract the American public from a presidential sex scandal in the weeks before an election. The film came out in December 1997. In August 1998, President Clinton launched cruise missile strikes against targets in Sudan and Afghanistan on the day after Monica Lewinsky testified before a grand jury. Republican Congressman Dan Burton said at the time, "I'd hate to think this was a Wag the Dog situation, but even if it was the right thing to do." Even his critics were hedging. Even the people who suspected it could not fully say it out loud. And this is the pattern. The suspicion is always there, the acknowledgement rarely comes, except now it has, from a sitting Republican congressman who wrote the law. The ultimate weapon of mass distraction. He said it, it is on the record. But let's go back further, because the history of governments manufacturing or redirecting public attention around spectacular claims has specific documented examples that are not conspiracy theories. They are congressional findings, they are declassified documents, they are admissions by the institutions themselves. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, the alleged North Vietnamese attack on American ships that triggered full American military involvement in Vietnam. The second incident, which provided the actual pretext for congressional authorization of force, almost certainly did not happen in the way it was described. The Johnson administration presented a fabricated or at minimum severely misrepresented event to Congress as the basis for escalating a war that killed 58,000 Americans and hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese civilians. The Pentagon Papers, leaked in 1971, confirmed the systematic gap between what the government was telling the public and what it actually knew. The government had been lying, consistently, deliberately, about a war in which young people were dying. The weapons of mass destruction in Iraq in 2003, Colin Powell, the United Nations Security Council, 75 minutes of satellite photographs and absolute certainty. The weapons did not exist, the intelligence was misrepresented, the war happened anyway. Hundreds of thousands of people died, no one went to prison. Colin Powell later said presenting that intelligence was the worst moment of his career. The people who made the decision retired comfortably. Operation Mockingbird, confirmed by the Church Committee investigation in 1975. The CIA had paid over 400 journalists, editors, and media executives to plant stories, shape narratives, and suppress information that did not serve intelligence community interests. 400 people, across major television networks, newspapers, and magazines. CIA Director William Colby told the committee that the agency owned everyone of any significance in the major media. This is in the congressional record, not a conspiracy theory, a finding by the United States Senate. Now here is the specific thing about UFOs and the CIA that most people do not know, and this is documented, this is in their own declassified materials. In the 1950s and 1960s, the CIA was testing reconnaissance aircraft and the U-2 and later the SR-71 at altitudes that civilians and military radar operators did not believe were possible. These planes were flying at 70,000 feet and above. When civilian air traffic controllers or military radar operators saw them, they could not identify what they were looking at because no aircraft was supposed to be able to fly that high, and they reported UFOs. Thousands of UFO reports from this era were actually sightings of CIA aircraft. The CIA knew this, and they made a specific decision. Rather than clarify the misidentifications, they allowed the UFO stories to circulate, because UFO stories were more useful than the truth. Because someone reporting a strange light at 70,000 feet and concluding it was an alien spacecraft was far less of a security problem than someone reporting a strange light at 70,000 feet and concluding that the US government had developed an aircraft capable of altitudes that violated the supposed limits of aviation technology. The CIA, in a 1997 declassified document, acknowledged that over half of all UFO sightings reported in the late 1950s and 1960s were their aircraft. They allowed the UFO narrative to flourish deliberately because it served their operational interests. This is the government's own documented history with UFO stories, not suppressing the truth about aliens, using the idea of aliens to suppress the truth about something else entirely. Then there is Operation Bluebeam. This one sits in more debated territory. Parts of it are documented government research, and parts of it are extrapolation and theory, but the documented parts are worth knowing about. NASA and various defense research programs conducted extensive research into the use of projected imagery, holographic technology, and large-scale psychological operations for mass effect. The research into whether populations could be made to believe they were experiencing extraordinary external events through the manipulation of what they see and hear and the context in which they experience it, that research is real. Whether any of it has been deployed in the way the more extreme versions of the Bluebeam theory suggest is a separate question, but the appetite for this kind of psychological operation, the interest in understanding what it would take to make a large population believe something spectacular and extraordinary was happening, that appetite existed and was funded and was studied. The War of the Worlds, broadcast by Orson Welles in 1938, caused genuine panic across the United States. People believed a Martian invasion was happening because a radio program told them it was. The government took detailed notes on that event. The study of how populations process and accept spectacular claims about events beyond their ordinary experience did not end with those notes. Now let me talk about the people pushing the UFO story hardest right now, because this is where it gets genuinely interesting. There is a specific pattern of former intelligence officers appearing across podcasts and alternative media to discuss UFOs and UAPs. David Grush testified under oath to Congress that the US government possesses crashed alien spacecraft and non-human biology. He then appeared on Joe Rogan. Luis Elizondo claimed the government possesses exotic material not made by humans. The Pentagon denied he ever even ran the program he says he led. He also appeared on Joe Rogan. Multiple former intelligence officers have built substantial public media careers specifically around the UFO disclosure topic over the past 5 years. They are articulate, they are credible seeming, they have the right credentials, and they are everywhere. Here is the detail that changes how you look at all of it. Every former CIA officer, every former intelligence official, every person who served in a classified capacity and then goes on a podcast or writes a book or gives an interview, every single one of them has signed a lifetime secrecy agreement requiring them to submit everything they intend to say publicly to the CIA's pre-publication review board before they say it. Books, speeches, podcast talking points, op-eds, blog posts, everything. The CIA reviews approximately 184,000 pages of declarations per year from former employees. That means every viral clip of a former intelligence officer describing crashed alien craft and non-human biology was read and approved by the CIA before it reached you. Every book, every congressional testimony, every podcast appearance, either cleared or not cleared, either the claim is something the CIA is comfortable with the public believing or it was never allowed to be said in the first place. So ask yourself, why is the CIA comfortable with the public believing that the US government possesses alien spacecraft? Why is that specific claim being allowed to circulate through pre-approved former officer testimony at precisely the moment when the Epstein files are generating the most politically damaging coverage for the current administration? The answer is not necessarily that aliens are fake. The answer is that the intelligence community has a documented history of finding UFO narratives useful, of allowing UFO stories to circulate when the alternative, the truth about what is actually happening, is more politically costly. Of using the mystery and the excitement and the sense of living through something historic to redirect public attention away from specific things that specific people need the public to stop focusing on. And now we have Pete Hegseth, the man who ran Fox and Friends, who renamed the Department of Defense the Department of War, standing in front of cameras saying these files hidden behind classifications have long fueled justified speculation, and it is time the American people see for themselves. The Epstein files are incomplete. Survivors are still waiting for justice. Names are still redacted. The bipartisan authors of the transparency law are still asking for access to the unredacted materials. And war.gov/UFO launched last week with a black background and white typewriter font and footage of a drone pilot seeing a light for 10 seconds that then disappeared. There were other distractions worth noting in recent months too. Earlier in 2026, US military operations against Venezuela generated news cycle dominance at moments when Epstein coverage was reaching politically damaging peaks. The Iran situation produced weeks of fear-based coverage that consumed public attention. There is always something. There is always a next thing. The circus does not stop. It just changes its act. Now, I want to be honest about what I am and I'm not saying, because this is important and I do not want to be misread. I am not saying nothing unexplained exists in the sky. There are documented cases of highly trained military pilots observing objects demonstrating flight characteristics inconsistent with any known human technology. Some of what has been reported is genuinely difficult to explain with currently available information. Russia, China, and Iran operate advanced drone technology that American military personnel may genuinely not be able to identify in real time. Some percentage of what gets reported may represent genuinely anomalous phenomena that current science cannot fully account for. None of that changes the argument. None of that is what I am not buying. What I am not buying is the timing. What I am not buying is the spectacle. What I am not buying is the dramatic black website launching in the specific week that lawmakers are publicly saying the Epstein disclosures are incomplete. What I am not buying is the idea that an administration that delivered 3 million heavily redacted pages in response to a law demanding full transparency about a sex trafficking network has suddenly decided that this specific week is the moment for genuine, unprecedented openness about the most extraordinary question in human history. Governments do not do that. That is not how governments work. The CIA has a documented history of using UFO narratives to cover classified programs and redirect public attention. The timing of this release corresponds precisely with the period of maximum political exposure around the Epstein documents. A sitting Republican congressman who wrote the transparency law called it the ultimate weapon of mass distraction. The files themselves contain drone pilots seeing lights for 10 seconds and astronauts theorizing about ice chunks. And Pete Hegseth is telling you this is transparency. The Romans built the Colosseum. They fed the population and gave them the gladiators and the chariot races and the spectacles so large and so consuming that the crowd could not simultaneously think about the corruption of the Senate or the specific decisions being made in the specific rooms they were not allowed into. 2,000 years ago, the same playbook, the same function. The only thing that has changed is the scale of the production and the speed of the distribution. A black website with white typewriter font. Footage of lights disappearing after 10 seconds. Former intelligence officers with CIA-approved talking points appearing on podcasts with millions of listeners, and the Secretary of the Department of War telling you it is transparency. The tail is wagging the dog, the circus is running, and the specific people whose specific decisions produce the specific redactions that specific survivors are still waiting for justice on are watching the conversation move somewhere else. Look at what they are not showing you, while they are showing you the lights in the sky. That is the real story, not the lights. What the lights are covering. The circus is running. The question is whether enough people have noticed to matter, and what you do about it if you have.